Welcome to my channel. Today's demo is another painting on mountains. Let me show you the colors we'll be using. Titanium white, Hansa yellow light, Cad red light, alizarin crimson, phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and ivory black. The surface we're painting on today is an 11 by 14 canvas panel. It already has an underpainting of burnt sienna. I'm going to start by sketching out the scene using a little bit of burnt sienna mixed with a little bit of Gamsol mineral spirits. I'm using a flat brush. I believe it's a size 4. This is the Ashley line from Princeton. It's a hog bristle brush. And here just making a little bit of a road map as far as the large shapes. That's where the top of the mountain's going to be, separating the mountain from the sky. I'm thinking about the thirds. So 1/3 is going to be the sky. Another third, or the larger portion of it, is going to be the mountains. And then the final third is going to be the foreground. I've established the horizon line. And now I'm sketching in some of the basic abstract shapes of the tree groupings. Once again, I'm not thinking about detail. I'm just thinking about the placement of the objects. Notice too that I'm painting using the full paintbrush. I'm not trying to hold it as a pencil. I'm holding on the tip so I can get more of a gestural movement as I make my lines and my shapes with the brush. And I'm thinking about, in today's scene, there's 3 major tree groupings. And so that's what I'm establishing here with the burnt sienna, is those 3 groupings. 2 that are more towards the center, and then this one on the right-hand side. And notice, I'm not looking at detail whatsoever. I'm just thinking about the large shape that I see in the setting. And once I have that, then I'll begin by painting the darks first and moving toward the lights. So I'm going to make up a mixture now of the Hansa yellow light and the ultramarine blue to create my green. So those are the 2 primaries. And to dull down that green a little bit, I'm going to add some alizarin crimson. That will also help to create a little bit darker tone as well. Not using any medium today. To make the paint flow a little bit better, if I need that, I'm dipping into just a little bit of the Gamblin mineral spirits, or Gamsol. Making sure that I've got enough of a pool of color here on my palette that I won't have to stop and remix it. And now I'm going to concentrate on simply getting this dark green on the canvas. I'm going to vary the brush strokes, and once I put the piece of paint on the painting, I'm going to leave it alone. So I'm consciously thinking about making different types of strokes so that there's some variety in the brushwork when we're finished. Once again, I'm not thinking about making trees at this point. I'm thinking about covering the canvas as quickly as possible, staying within the lines that I've made basically with the sketch of the abstract shapes of the tree groupings. trying to vary the strokes as much as possible to provide variety. Not thinking about painting leaves or trunks of trees. Just covering the big shapes for this landscape painting. Using a photo reference today. As well as a small outdoor plein air study to create this. Okay, and now I've got some abstract shapes to begin working with. Some Hansa yellow, back into my green pool of color. What I'm doing now is comparing, I need lighter green, and by mixing right into that pool of color, I'm doing two things. I'm saving paint, I'm not scraping the palette off, and then I'm able to compare it right away to the darker green that I've already put on there. This is for the ground plane, so this needs to be a little bit different shade of green, a little bit lighter. So there's more Hansa yellow light in this mixture. And I did not put any alizarin crimson in this particular mixture. Once again, varying my brush strokes. And the aim here is to cover the canvas as quick as possible. You know, since this is another darker color, I am using the same paintbrush. Remember that color values are always seen in relationship to one another. So until we start getting more colors on the canvas panel, it'll be impossible to know. Now I'm still in the green mixture, and I'm just taking a different area of it, putting some titanium white. Start small with the amount of titanium white that you put into the pool. You can always adjust the color a little bit later on. And I want to get some distance between this foreground and the field behind it, which is closer to the mountain. And so I'm now judging the value, and it is lighter. It does set that back. And now I'm painting into the shapes I had previously put for the tree groupings to indicate that there is this field behind those trees that's closer to the mountain. So that way it pulls your eye back into the painting. And so this field that's a little bit further back is especially emphasized on the left side of the canvas. Just varying the brush strokes. See, I'm just thinking of it as putting pieces of paint onto the canvas panel. And once you put those pieces on, leave them alone. Our tendency is to turn that into mud by going back in and constantly repainting it. And what you really want to get in the habit of doing is go with your value, paint it, put the paint strips down. Then we'll have time in a later stage in which we can manipulate and change if it's needed. But until we've covered the entire canvas, we really don't know how to judge all of these relationships yet. Now I'm going to be working on the middle third section, which is the mountain. So here soon, cleaning off my brushes, reaching for a new brush, because this is going to be a little bit lighter value. And now for my purple mixture of ultramarine blue and the alizarin crimson, and then adding a little bit of the titanium white so that we can actually see the color. And noticing that I need this to be lighter, I'm adding some more titanium white. Your lightest plane is always going to be your sky. The next lightest is going to be the ground plane, because that's the plane that's reflecting the most light upwards. And then the darkest is going to be anything in the vertical, which would be the trees. And in this case, since the trees sit in front of the mountain is going to be the second darkest color. I try to pick a middle tone. And so this is the purple that we've come up with. Like I said, I can always do some adjusting after I've covered the canvas. So sometimes you aim for hitting a middle value, knowing that you can always adjust it from there. Now I'm painting into the tree shapes, which helps to further define the trees as well as the mountain. Notice again, I'm not fussy. I'm simply putting down pieces of paint and then leaving it alone. Being careful here not to totally obliterate the edges of the trees that I put down prior. Kind of painting up into it. I'll have time to further refine those shapes after I've covered the canvas with paint. And now I'm just going to continue to vary the brush strokes. Otherwise, if you put your brain on autopilot, you'll start making the same shapes over and over and over again, and that will make your painting boring. We want some variety. Now just covering the canvas is what we're working on. Now obviously, at this point in the painting, these large shapes are going to need to be fine-tuned. Otherwise, that purple alone is too strong. But it's most important to get those big shapes painted first, and then I'll be able to come into those big shapes with smaller shapes and color variations, which will add variety and interest to the painting. Here again, I'm cutting into the tree shape with the purple to create a sense of variety. But I'm not fussing. I'm laying it in and leaving it alone. Using a shop towel to wipe my excess paint off the paintbrush, and then I will give it a swirl in my Gamsol mineral spirits to clean it. And sometimes I'll grab a new brush for the light color, especially when you're going to the sky. It's always good to have a clean brush to keep those colors vivid and unmuddied. This is a mixture of titanium white and just a little bit of phthalo blue. Phthalo blue and phthalo green. I don't usually have phthalo green on my palette, but phthalo blue and phthalo green are very intense colors, so you do not need to use much In fact, if you use too much, you will end up changing everything to a rather unnatural color. So we don't want that. I tend to paint from a top-down approach for the sky color. That way there's less reflection on the paint. I'm also thinking about clouds. I want to break up this blue, even though it's not the focal point of the painting. I want to make sure that there's a few clouds in this scene today. I don't believe there were any clouds on the day in which I actually observed this, but no one's going to know that. My purpose is to make a good painting, not to give you all the information of exactly what it looked like on that particular day. An artist's view is to move trees, move clouds as he or she sees fit to tell a story. So where you see the orange, that is going to be my roadmap for where the clouds are going to go. And the cloud mixture is going to be composed of some titanium white, which is a little tad of Hansa yellow light to warm it up temperature-wise. If I just go in there with clouds from titanium white, it's going to cool that scene down considerably. So I like to mix just a little bit of the Hansa yellow light to give it a temperature change to the warm side. Once again, I'm cleaning my brushes with the paper towel. Now I'm going in with the titanium white and just a little bit of that yellow Hansa light to warm that titanium white up. And then I'm going to start applying for the clouds. Once again, I've already given myself a roadmap, and I'm simply lightly putting the paint down and leaving it alone. This will give a sense of soft edges as I'm just kind of tapping at the corners as I lay that paint down. Trying to also vary the brush strokes. It's okay if a little bit of that burnt sienna underpainting shows through. And now working to cover the canvas. I typically paint with numbers 4, 6, and 8 for a painting this size. They're all hog bristle brushes. Now I'm thinking about these lines on the top of the mountain. I want them to be a little softer, not too hard. So I'm lightly touching the paintbrush to the edge with the white titanium cloud mixture, and then as it meets the purple of the mountains. Once again, not overpainting. Otherwise, I'll turn this into a bunch of mush. You won't be able to distinguish the clouds from the sky color. And now I've got the one more section of the clouds to stick in there. Just going in and putting those pieces of color, if you will. I can always refine the shapes a little bit more later on. But now the canvas is basically covered. Now I'll be looking at ways to distinguish the shapes, looking to paint back into the major shapes to provide variety. And one way you can do that is, so I've got the mountain color already on my palette. So I'm taking some ultramarine blue and some titanium white, and I'm squinting as I make this mixture to see when those two colors disappear for me. When they look like they're the same color when I squint, then I know that they're the same tonal value. And now I'm going to put this blue to create some interest in the mountain. I'm looking at the valleys, the shadows that are appearing to me on the mountain in my photo, and then placing them approximately where they need to go to create some interest and to break up all of that purple. Yes, they're down here. Got dogs down with me as I'm taping today. That's what happens when you have a home studio in the basement of your house. I wanted to make the bottom of that mountain a little bit darker because it is closer to the viewer. And so those few strokes I did that, and now I'm back to looking at how to break up this mass of purple on the mountain with some shadow effects using that mixture of ultramarine blue and titanium white. In essence, when you use a limited palette like I do, almost all the colors are going into each of your mixtures. And this has a way of producing natural color harmony. So, one piece of advice to beginners: do not rush out and buy tons and tons of different paint colors. You can mix everything you need from one red, one yellow, one blue. Stick with an ultramarine blue, either a Hansa yellow light or a CAD yellow light. And for the red, you could go with a CAD red light, a CAD red medium, or an alizarin crimson. And then, of course, you need your titanium white. So I'm just focusing on getting some of these shaded areas of the mountain. See how that breaks up that large shape and now makes it much more readable as an actual mountain. And that's what I mean, focusing in on the large shapes first, then allows us to go back into it with some variety. Now, there are some spots where you can clearly see the vegetation, the green on the mountain. And so now I've done the same process, mixing and squinting with my palette to come up with a slight green toned color. And now, as you see it applied to the mountain, it doesn't stick out too much, but its effect is subtle. Yet at the same time, it does what I want it to do. It breaks up the larger mass, giving a little bit more variety and interest into the painting. Imagine these are where the treetops are on that mountain that are so distant that you really can't see any detail whatsoever of those trees. What you end up seeing is simply a slight change in the tonal value of the shadows. Now I'm taking some Hansa yellow light into that green mixture again, along with a little bit of titanium white, and I'm going to use this to produce some highlights. So this is the area where the sun is really affecting the tree color. This is another place that can cause problems for beginners, is you become in love with the highlights because these are the boldest colors you're putting down, and you need to remember to only put a few highlights. Sometimes we end up obliterating the darks, but you need that contrast for the highlights to show up. So it defeats the purpose if you use the highlight color everywhere. This tree was not actually leaning in like this, but for the purposes of the painting, what I'm trying to do is keep the viewer in the painting and not drifting on to somebody else's painting off to the right. Putting a few more highlights on the remaining tree groups. And there's a smaller bush or shrub in the front. We'll get a little bit of light on that as well. Just dabbing the color into it. Working on the edges. Now I'm also thinking about a path to take us into the painting towards the mountain. It'll run through the trees and through that little blob where I left the underpainting totally visible by the trees. It'll be a mixture of some yellow ochre and some titanium white to produce that path. Do you see how you don't need a lot of details to make the scene look realistic? With just the highlights on the trees, those blobs become trees. Your eye begins filling in the detail. There's no detail in this painting whatsoever. There's just different variations of the color, but your eye still reads it as trees, as a mountain, as a sky, as a landmass, filling in the details for us. So there's that mixture for this. It's a little bit too bold, a little bit too bright at this point in time, but once again, you don't know that until you see it next to and in relationship to the other colors. I can go back in there and lighten these colors with a dry brush technique, which I'll do in just a moment. So I wiped that color off of my brush, and now I'm taking and just smoothing those edges and lowering the intensity of that yellow color. Now I'm trying to work on the edges to make them lighter. And since this is a path, I'm thinking about the fact that this is the brightest part of the path I've just put in, but there should be a little bit darker part of that path. So I'm going to use for that darker part of the path some burnt sienna. And that's what I'm going to be doing now, is mixing on my palette some burnt sienna with some of that yellow ochre and titanium white. And then I'll come back in underneath that yellow ochre and titanium white to create the illusion of some detailed shadowing effects from the sun on that path. This is where I want the viewer to go to view the painting, is through that landscape. I'm also now looking and seeing if I need to further separate the mountain from the foreground to make it sit back a little bit more, which means I may paint a little bit of the green that I still have in my palette. I'm going to add some more titanium white to help gray it down, and then put that near the base of the mountain so that it reads correctly. And then I'll pop in some of that same color in between the tree groupings so that you get a sense that there's a plane of grass back there before you get to the mountain. Then I'm going to just soften up these edges I've just put in there. So it retains the natural feel and look of the place. Doing the same thing with the trail going through those trees. And the final thing I'm going to do is to darken my darks. Sometimes after you put highlights on, you've made some changes, you may wish to come back in and reestablish some of the darks. For me, this will be in the trees, and I'll be mixing ultramarine blue with a little bit of Hansa yellow light and perhaps a little bit of alizarin crimson to create a nice dark green. And then I'm going to put a few brush strokes back into these trees. This I debated about for a little bit because I sort of like the burnt sienna showing through these tree groups. I could have easily have just stopped right here and signed the painting, but I decided to reestablish these darks. Maybe it was a good thing, maybe it was a mistake to do this. That's another thing you'll have to get used to as a painter, is that there will be times in which you get stuck. Do you keep painting or do you stop? And of course, you could always go back into the painting the following day if you wished. But I do find that painting it all at once, alla prima, really lends to the spontaneity, the originality of the brushstrokes, the sense of immediacy and spontaneity, and I much prefer that over a detailed painting process in which you're painting over several days and adding details. I think that what you end up with is a fussed over painting that doesn't have the kind of energy that you get from painting it all at once. And so I'm reasonably happy with the shapes that came out of this as I darken up certain areas. And after this, then the only thing to do will be to go in and sign the painting. And because there's so many of the tree groupings more towards the right, the painting seems a little heavy that side. So instead of putting my signature at the right, since we read right to left, left to right rather, then I'm going to put the signature on the left-hand side. Normally I would put it on the right, but that will help give it a little bit more depth over there and not be too much of a distraction. Kind of balancing the painting. Right now, I think I'm taking a moment to see if there's anything else I want to add. I may be cleaning off a brush or two in my Gamsol solution before I finally sign it. So let me take this as a reminder to thank you for watching this video today. I have other videos on my channel, so please subscribe There'll be a link at the very end of this video. And then I have other painting demonstrations available for you to watch and would encourage you to do so. Many of these works are also available for sale. I sell on eBay. Just go to eBay and put David Wesley Poe into the search engine, and you'll find what the latest paintings are that I have available. And there I am, signing my painting by using one of these rubber tip tools. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful to you. Give me a thumbs up if you found it helpful. And please subscribe to my channel so that you will be the latest to be notified when I upload another painting demonstration.